My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. The first reading today is from the prophet Daniel. It's one of the longest readings in the liturgical year, and it's the story of Susanna, who was spied upon by two elders who were absolutely taken over by their lust for her as she went bathing. So the reading in this passage, as you'll read, probably you'll read it from home or see it on the internet or something, but the reading uses a fascinating turn of phrase about the temptation of these two men. It says, quote, "They suppressed their consciences and would not allow their eyes to look to heaven." To suppress one's conscience. Now that's a pretty serious thing to do. In fact, another translation says, "They perverted their mind," it says. So that means not listening to the gentle call of the conscience within us is, well, a form of perversion. And it would kind of like be a form of rupture within us. Clearly, of course, their presence there in that little forest, in that area where Susanna was bathing, was no accident. They knew full well that this was wrong and acted really as scheming predators, while chaste Susanna had no idea that she was being observed in this way. And she is unfairly, as you know in the story, she's unfairly accused and is almost sentenced to death until the prophet Daniel comes, of course, and saves the day. Now, this story was especially popular among European painters in the 16th and 17th centuries, painters like Rembrandt and Tintoretto and Guido Reni or Paolo Veronese, or the Carracci brothers, or Rubens himself painted this a number of times, and Van Dyck as well, and even Artemisia Gentileschi, she's a female painter of the time. And I mean, those are some of the famous painters of that period. And now, some of those painters emphasized the vindication of Susanna, and others focused more on just the actual drama of the moment. And sometimes, Susanna she just totally looks oblivious, like in the Tintoretto painting. And other times she looks very ashamed. She looked like way vulnerable. And other times, of course, she just looks like a victim. But, the whole drama, people just like to paint it. And they, for whatever reason, patrons like to have this scene represented. But how hard it is to show this battle of these two men with their own conscience. How they were blocking off the calls of their conscience, which they had just closed themselves off from. And they're represented as these creepy old men with kind of like hooked noses. But that inner dilemma is much harder to show in painting. Right? Now, Pope John Paul II had spoken often in his life, in his pontificate, about conscience in our life, about its function as a guide to highlight what he called the objective norms of morality, norms that we have not made up or invented, but that have been there all along. And the conscience spells out to us what we have to apply and how, and in the here and now, let's say. And well, I would say that those elders in that forest where they watched Susanna, they would have heard those promptings, and they knew that this was wrong, but they ignored the gentle call of God. What John Paul II called the voice of this law, which speaks to a person's heart when necessary. Do this, avoid that. So they would have heard, avoid that, don't go there, but they still went ahead. Now, Cardinal Newman in the 19th century said that conscience is a connecting principle between the creature and his creator. A connecting principle. Moral and religious teachings, well, they come from God, and they are binding on us, on our mind, and on our will, even if we might not be particularly, let's say, enthused by them. It's not our own personal oracle. That's not what conscience is. and that we somehow consult now and then. It is really God's voice that we hear in our well-formed mind, in our heart, and then we put it into practice using our will. Right? And so when we say to have a good conscience, simply means to have a good grasp and a clear application of these moral truths. Some people have compared the conscience to the GPS in your car. We all use these days Waze and Google Maps, and it tells us, okay, turn left here, turn right here, and so forth, right? So we trust that it will get us to our destination. Right? But of course, for us to do that, we have to obey the indications that the lady on Waze, or the man, whoever that is, speaking to us says. And we've all seen how it recalculates, right? When we go ahead and just ignore the instructions and don't take that turn off, it just recalculates and say, okay, now you can go turn off of the next exit, right? And so it always wants us to get to that destination. But this does not only help us. Of course, the conscience doesn't only help us to get to our destination, that is, like, let's say, to a friend's party. Especially these days, there's no parties or anything, right? So, but it's, these days we're staying home. So there are other real ways, of course, that the conscience guides us in our decisions. I'll give you an example that has often really moved me and touched me a lot. And that is the example of the day in which Pope Benedict announced his resignation. Right? On that day, he addressed the cardinals, and he said that he had repeatedly searched his conscience. Right? Repeatedly searched his conscience. And he went back, you could say, to that secret place again and again, repeatedly, in prayer, and eventually he came to the certitude that, well, this is what God was asking of him, to resign as Pope, as Roman Pontiff. And he was certain, not simply of a feeling or even of a fear, but that this is what God was asking him at that time in this situation. Right? And what a momentous decision it was for him. It wasn't easy, but it was, you could say, well-covered territory for him. He had been in contact with that voice many times, and he was used to obeying it. Right? He was docile. It was like a compass that he'd often looked at and had guided his walks with the Lord. And we have to look at that context, that compass rather, too. And it has always encouraged me to think that God can indeed guide us with this inner light, with this compass. Even better, with this, you could say, this attraction for the good. And it is encouraging to think that he doesn't leave us in the dark without mooring or anchor. Lord, I am in contact now with that divine voice of yours. Am I really in contact with that voice of yours in my conscience? Do I hear you reassure me in this time of uncertainty? Well, this is a time of uncertainty, and this time is new for everybody, yet he has something he wants to tell you now. Okay? The Master wants to speak. Let's use these days of isolation to form our conscience and increase our bandwidth, you could say, so we can really perceive what he is saying. And we can do that in our prayer. We can reinforce that by, strengthening our doctrinal formation, just reading slowly some passages from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's kind of like updating your inner software. And what about today's gospel? What about that? It's, of course, the story of the woman caught in adultery. Or we can picture all these angry scribes and Pharisees hurling this poor woman at the feet of the Lord. And she lies there weeping in a cloud of dust there, right? And they thought to themselves, well, he can't deny what Moses said about stoning women, right, who are caught in adultery. So now we've got him, because we've caught this woman. Right? But the Lord's mercy, is as great as his wisdom and his calm. I always love to picture our Lord here super calm. And he's not perturbed by this trap. He tells them that he who is without sin should hurl the first stone. And clearly, they are aware that they are not without sin. They are aware of that. So, none of us, of course, is without sin. So those words lead them there to drop their stones, their weapons of hate, and they drop them on the ground. It's as though he had provoked in them some semblance of mercy. And so he kind of won them over, and plus, of course, made this new disciple of this woman. He told her, do not sin again. Lord, thank you for your divine mercy. Help me to really, in these days, drink it in with real acts of contrition, especially now since we can't really go to confession. It's very, at least very difficult now. So how much value a real, perfect act of contrition has. It can be like a soothing balm over my inner wounds. Grant me that spirit today, O Lord. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me in this time of prayer. I ask your help, Lord, to put them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.